Hello, everyone who has joined us. We are very glad to have you with us at the beginning of the second, what we hope will be annual AppSec Days Pacific Northwest and OWASP AppSec Conference. I'd like to be sure you know, because we're proud of it, that this is an international regional conference. It is produced by volunteers from the Victoria and Vancouver chapters of OWASP in Canada and from the Seattle and Portland chapters of OWASP in the United States. There is, if you need the schedule during the day, the best place to look is at our website, appsecpnw.org. We have had a recent last-minute change, and the schedule on that website is current. It is up to date. The last speaker in track 2, alas, called us yesterday and said he had just tested positive for COVID. So our thoughts are with him for an easy experience of it. And we did manage to find a volunteer in one of our chapters who has stepped up to present, and his information is on that schedule online. That's Dana Epp. Thank you, Dana. He'll be presenting on the 7 sins of an AppSec program. Definitely worth paying attention to. But turning to our main event now, it is my privilege and honor to introduce our first keynote speaker of the day, someone you probably all know, Andrew Vanderstock. He is a seasoned web application security specialist and an enterprise security architect who has been researching and developing in the web application security architecture fields since 1998. He's worked in the IT industry for over 25 years, and you know him as the executive director of OWASP. He's been taking the foundation through organizational changes and bringing our mission to the next level. He also co-leads the OWASP Application Security Verification Standard and the OWASP Top 10 project. And if you didn't gather already from hearing him speak just now informally with us, he is an Australian expat from Melbourne and Sydney, currently living in the United States. He's here to talk to us about OWASP as a secure supply chain force multiplier. And I will at this point relinquish the screen.
Okay, hopefully you're seeing my screen.
I am.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. The reality is I wrote that bio about 1.5 years ago, and honestly, I've been a very bad co-leader, and those 2 projects, the OWASP Top 10 and the ASVS, well, realistically, they have much better co-leaders than me. So if you are interested in getting involved in either the Application Security Verification Standard or the OWASP Top 10, we will be doing data collection next year in the OWASP Top 10 for 2024. It is an exciting project to be involved in. It's one of the most visible, so definitely. Okay, so we're going to talk about OWASP as a secure supply chain force multiplier. One of the things that I've done recently is I went to Washington, DC and promptly caught COVID. So many people pretending to be vaccinated. Anyway, I'm fully boosted. It was reasonably mild, and I only have brain fog. So if I do actually repeat myself, I do apologize. But fundamentally, I went there for SBOM stuff, and so secure supply chain is actually on everyone's lips at the moment. And to us, it's a really great way to lens what is OWASP doing, and how do we actually become part of that conversation. And we need to do it differently than we've been doing it. So about OWASP, we actually are the largest global AppSec organization, bar none. There are no others that even approach our size. We have 255 projects. We have 5,900 financial members. We have over 80,000 participants in 190 countries. We have 422 chapters, of which around 200 and something are active, which is an amazing transformation since the beginning of 2020. Especially considering it's COVID and everyone has been doing remote activities. So the reform that we've been undertaking has really revitalized OWASP, and we've never had more members, we've never had more activity, we've never had this many RSVPs for events. We've never had more people vote in the board election than we've had in the last year or so. So we are heading in the right direction, and that's exactly where we need to go. But now we need to take it to the next level. So we're very big on projects. If you type in OWASP, the first 2 or 3 pages are all about our projects. That is by its nature going to happen anyway, because if you think about an individual chapter, people might search for OWASP Portland or OWASP Victoria, but they don't actually end up linking to it very many places, whereas the OWASP Top 10 is everywhere. So we're famous for projects. We're also famous for community. And I'll talk a bit about that in a future slide. We also have many different events. We have AppSec Asia coming up in August and early September, and that will have a dedicated Japanese track if you're interested, but it'll actually be in Singaporean time. It may not be necessarily a great time zone for the rest of us. There's also going to be OWASP the Global AppSec in San Francisco, our first in-person event since 2019 as a Global AppSec. So I'm really looking forward to that. Our board will be there. I will be there. So I do hope to see you all there. It's in November, and the very early part of November, so please save the date. We actually do have quite a large number of regional meetings like this, but also many, many hundreds of chapter meetings in any one week. I promised myself that I would try to attend one chapter meeting a week. I am blessed for choice, and that is something that's really heartwarming to me. So thank you to everybody who's actively organising events and regional chapter meetings and obviously local chapters. So what is the problem? The problem is complexity. We actually do have an issue where even simple programs have a large number of transitive dependencies, and the way that we currently work is we look at your code and then we move on and ignore all of this stuff that's underneath the bottom of it. And we don't know that that stuff is actually safe. In fact, we can probably just assume that it's not because we're not looking at it. But it would be prohibitively costly under the current model to review all software. Like, say, for example, you've built a program that runs a mobile application that does banking. You might have 300 or 400 dependencies. If we had to review all of those dependencies in the same way that we review the main part of the code, it would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars per app, and that's a very high cost. And all you get at the end of it is a PDF. We've got to move away from that. And honestly, a lot of this stuff, if anyone remembers the LeftPad debacle with Node.js a couple of years ago, where thousands and millions of apps depended upon this really trivial library that left-padded text, the guy basically withdrew the module because of a licensing disagreement or something, and that's his right. It's open source software, you can do what you want. And all of these programs broke. But would you necessarily trust a component that's written by Barney Dinosaur 420? We literally, we place our trust every day in software that we have no idea about. We don't know the provenance. We don't know how much of the code is actually called. And therefore, the trust is just there. You basically have faith that what you've brought in and your testing, if you do any, is going to actually highlight any security bugs. But that's not necessarily true. What happens if the tester has got an off day or spends all the time on Reddit and you get a report that says it's all hunky-dory, nothing's wrong, but in reality there's this glaring hole that they missed because they were busy doing something else or it was beyond their skill set. What you're really doing is testing the skill set and the time availability of the tester, not necessarily the software. Now, this basically creates a lot of technical debt and an incredible fragility, particularly if you've got a lot of dependencies that depend upon other things. Anybody who's ever used Dependency Track or Synopsys's Black Duck software, you will know that many of these modules bring in other modules, and then those modules bring in other modules. And they sometimes have 8 or 9 copies of the same module, but different versions thereof. Which one is the one that's called? We don't know. Which one is the one that's vulnerable? Probably 3 or 4 of them. We don't know. So the technical debt is there and it's fragile. So many times it's nearly impossible to prevent this problem, particularly in certain frameworks like Node and Java and a few others as well, which have got an incredible ecosystem. But the problem with the ecosystem is that it relies upon lots of little modules that bring in lots of other little modules. And we don't have great tooling for that today. The tooling has often got false positives. It doesn't quite have the capability of telling you if this piece of code is being called or not, and therefore you don't know if it's dangerous. Lastly, when you link, only statically compiled languages generally link, and therefore you can find out a little bit more about what's actually being run on your server. But dynamic languages like Node and whatnot, unless you're using TypeScript, you're not going to know whether or not that code is being called, whether or not it's being brought in, and whether or not it's being packaged up. Lastly, our current ecosystem comes from the days of desk checks, and it was wrong back in the 1960s when it was first thought up. If you've ever read The Mythical Man Month, it describes a process where multiple people would sit down and literally run through algorithms on the desk, and they would desk check the software to make sure that it would actually be safe. The modern version of that is doing unit and integration testing. But the reality is, when we do penetration testing, it's sort of like when you go and look at a bridge and you're sampling the actual concrete for tensile strength. You're testing a little bit of it, you're not testing the entire thing. But the current ecosystem around testing is built around one-to-one reviews. So one team, one tester, or two testers if you're lucky, reviewing it once every 12 to 18 months if you're lucky. That is the wrong ecosystem. It literally helps people who are well off, but it makes open source projects rely upon the goodwill of strangers. Now, our friends at the OpenSSF project have a project going called Alpha Omega, and they are concentrating on the top 100 programs that they are aware of. And for what it's worth, Log4j was number 17 in that list. But it was only number 17, but it was the one that actually got pinged, like massively exploited. And if you look through the top 100, only a certain percentage of them are actually web apps or web app libraries. There are many other fundamental pieces of software like SSH and the Linux kernel and things like that that are really truly very, very important. One of the things they've identified, for example, is that GNU toolchain website is stuck together with gaffer tape, and the best wishes of the people involved. It is in dire need of rejuvenation. But to test whether or not the GNU toolchain that every other piece of software is built with is actually secure and safe is a mammoth, gargantuan task. And OpenSSF are funding that through the largesse of their patrons. But fundamentally, it's not necessarily scalable. For anyone who's ever used our tooling, you do know that it will have false positives, and it requires someone with our skill set to actually go through and eliminate those particular false positives. And that requires a level of scalability that's just not there. If I was to do a code review using a SaaS tool, anything over about 1,000 lines of code will produce between 200 and 300 things that it's looking to. The reality is a lot of these tools are designed around the concept that I'd rather tell you a bit more than not tell you at all. There are some tools that go the other way and say, this is a definite problem, but then you might be missing something really important. So these are high friction, difficult to use tools with a lot of false positives that have a high cost. And so we have a huge problem in the secure supply chain. And there's no easy way of solving this without fundamentally rethinking the way that we do what we do. So I wanted to show you a movie that someone created. I'll just make this full screen. This tool creates SBOM maps, graphical SBOM maps. He mapped that tool. The tool is only a couple of hundred lines long. It produces a Cyclone DX SBOM. That tool has all of these dependencies, and you can see the cyclical nature of some of them as well. This is just one tool that's several hundred lines of code. And you can see that this is incredibly complex, and yet the only bit that we would review on a regular basis, let me just pause this, pause, the only bit that most of the time that we would review is this bit up here. This is the bit that would have been written by the individual rather than the bit that was actually bringing in all of these dependencies. And so we're reviewing this little bit up here, and it's literally the tip of the iceberg. That is the problem we've got. So if you're interested in that, the slides will be made available after this talk. There is a link to the Twitter. It's from Patrick Svensson. Definitely worthwhile having a look. Definitely, if you're interested in S-bombs, it's definitely one of those things that you should probably start to get involved in. So last year, I was lucky enough to convince the board that we needed a new mission statement after 20 years. We actually had a lot of different problems where our mission statement didn't accurately describe anything we did. It didn't mention events, it didn't mention chapters, it didn't mention members. It only just said that we were going to educate and raise awareness of AppSec. And that's it. So we didn't mention projects really. We didn't do anything about fundraising. So we were able to get a new mission statement through, and it's quite lengthy, but the headline for me is no more insecure software. This is an aspiration. Is it ever going to be achieved? No. But things like in the data set that we have for the OWASP Top 10, we have had to put cross-site scripting and all forms of cross-site scripting, including HTML injection, into injections just to keep it in the OWASP Top 10, but also to keep injections in the OWASP Top 10. And I would imagine in 2024, if the trend continues, injections will no longer be in the OWASP Top 10, and that'll be a tremendous achievement. And the reason why that happened is because frameworks made it easier to do it the safe way rather than the hard way. And so this demonstrates to me where we need to focus our efforts, and it's the frameworks, not the individual coders, but the frameworks. We don't have scale. At the end of the day, if you think about like an ocean of sandy beaches and you're just making one singular castle and you're reviewing that castle, so that sand castle's great, but all the other grains of sand represent a program. We should be focusing upon the things that help build the castle, so that anyone else building another sandcastle will actually be able to produce a secure and safe sandcastle. I know that's probably a really strange analogy, but I hope you're following along. All analogies, when pushed hard enough, fall over, including sandcastles. So we have a problem with scale. We can't keep on doing what we're doing. At the moment, there is a known gap of practitioners versus demand, and this keeps salaries very high, which is great for us, but it's terrible for the economy and it's terrible for application security. So as a foundation that promotes application security, we need to think differently. So I've just talked about scale, and the slide that I was seeing was coming up next. So there's the slide on the sandcastle, so there you go. Now, next we've got to think about education. I've done so much training of developers. I've probably trained several thousand developers in my time, and they would have probably trained other people as well. But the reality is that this model, again, doesn't scale well. Folks like Jim Manico and Philip DeRick, they literally do this day in, day out, all year long, and they would only get to a tiny, tiny fraction of the overall number of developers. And yet every developer needs to know how to actually code securely. So again, the way that we're doing it at the moment, the market is incorrect. There is a lot of reward for doing it this way rather than doing it the proper way, which in my view, if you're becoming a software engineer or a computer scientist, you need to take at least one module of application security at university, and every university should do that to be allowed to call their course a computer science or a software engineering course. That's the only way this scales. And so we do actually have an education committee, and the education committee is working on an AppSec curriculum project. If you've had a chance to look at the AppSec EU in the last week, Adrian Winkles was presenting details on that particular project. This is the correct way. We can't scale unless developers know there is a problem, there is a solution. Do they need to know absolutely everything about AppSec? No, only if they major in AppSec. And at the moment, very few people can major in application security. But I believe, just like mechanical engineers and civil engineers, they do not get to go and become an engineer with the IEEE unless they can demonstrate certain skills. And to my mind, application security is a core, fundamental skill. It is possibly more important than maintainability or performance. even understanding and knowing about the correct algorithms to use may not be as important these days as knowing that there is a problem with application security, and here is where to go. OWASP.org, here are some better libraries. That needs to be taught at universities. We need to scale. We can't scale with one-to-one education. We also need to rely more heavily upon virtual education. And again, our friends at OpenSSF have published all of their courses freely on both EDX, which you can get a certificate for a small sum of money, but also they're doing their own certification now. And this is one of the reasons why I want us to get into certification, so that we can fund more education and become able to market our education to the wider world. We've got to think more broadly about where we want to go. Just because we haven't done it in the past is not a good reason not to do it in the future. We need to grow, we need to change. You can't build a bridge by reviewing it. Even if you review it, it could be a horrible mess like this, where it's just bridge after bridge after bridge, and you can see that there's probably very little walkability between the apartment buildings on the top right and the rest of the area you see. So although this looks like a really fantastic set of bridges, if you were reviewing it, you would say, yes, these bridges are good, they're going to stay up. But is it a good bridge? The architecture is probably not so good for humans. And this is one of the things that I think OWASP needs to concentrate on as well. We need to stop reviewing and we need to start doing. So do it by, instead of producing a PDF, produce a pull request. And this means everyone should be able to code in the languages they review. If they're unable to get the source code to the applications they're reviewing, which is very common in penetration testing, this to me is exactly like an accountant doing an external audit without having access to the books. How would you know that you actually got true and accurate reflection of the state of the organization if you didn't have access to the books? I don't believe we should be allowed to do penetration testing without the source code, so that when you do the pen test, you can be guided by the source code and then you can produce better results. Because the reality is, if you're doing a 3 or 5 day test, you've only got 3 or 5 days. The hackers have got infinite time, and if they're good at reverse engineering, they can work this stuff out. They want to target you, they will target you, whereas a penetration tester will only have a very short period of time to produce great results. One of the biggest problems that we do see is, because there is high friction, there is really no buy-in at most development shops for security. People know that they need to do security, but it's more or less, let's beat the piñata and get the security out of it. But you could beat the piñata for hours and hours and hours and still get candy from it. We don't want that. We want just simply to have a bowl of candy that we can grab and start eating. We want to make the secure way the easy way, and we want to get rid of the computer says no. A lot of the time we actually get the, for many of us in the industry, you write a report and the developers are looking at the report saying, I can't go live until I fix these problems. That is really the wrong way to go about it. If we're looking at, like, say for example, a internet banking application, you are not going to take it down while you repair it. It's better for us to actually get involved early, and it's better to be a low friction environment. And that is actually something that we don't have at the moment. Now, this is not a diss on OWASP projects. We are one of the only places on the internet doing application security projects that everybody can consume. And I do see today that we actually have a number of sponsors who produce tools, including Stackhawk, which produced their own version of OWASP SAP. They actually help fund OWASP SAP development, and so for that we're eternally grateful. But fundamentally, the projects we've got don't really, they've solved a particular itch for a particular programmer, but they have not solved an integrated problem. If we look at, for example, the gaps in the OWASP project portfolio, we have 255 projects, but we have very few that deal with architecture. And I'm a security architect by trade, if you like. Honestly, we should have been investing in architecture for a long time. But up until recently with the finance reform, the board had no real input into how do we develop things that people don't necessarily want to develop, but are strategically important? We need to be able to invest in it. We need to change the mindset that you can become an OWASP project to get free stuff to being you're part of an overall big picture and you're going to change the world. That's the mindset that we need to change. It can be, if you look at it from the point of view that you can join as an OWASP project as easily as you can create a project at GitHub, and then you get some benefits, that is not the right approach. We should probably be a bit more choosy about our projects, but also we should be encouraging people to fill in the gaps. If you haven't had a chance to yet look at the latest version of SKF, Google's been helping fund that, and the OpenSSF have been helping fund that. He has actually moved that along so far. For a long time, OWASP had rules that said that project leaders could not get paid. Almost as soon as we remove that restriction, we start getting projects moving, and we get tremendous advances because of that. And the CRS project is another one, the core rule set. Christian Fellini and the folks from that project are doing massive work. They've obtained a grant for themselves, and that's almost enough to fund an individual developer to become a contractor who works full-time on the core rule set. This is a massive change, and it will produce better WAFs for everybody, including the commercial vendors who use the core rule set with mod security as the basis of their commercial WAF. There's a reason why it's a flagship, but we need to evolve, and that evolution is happening now, and it's really important that we continue that evolution. One of the biggest problems that I do see, when I was actually, recently, I play a game called Elite Dangerous, and it is a big time suck, but it's the most amazing game you'll ever come across. It models the entire galaxy. There's 400 billion stars you can visit. There's lots of things going on in there. But actually, the people in my squadron are often in my industry, which to me is amazing, absolutely amazing. I was actually a second-degree connection from someone who I'd been playing with for months and I never knew. So what we're actually doing is networking inside our own bubble. We need to reach out further. And so what we're going to be doing over the next few months is we're going to be having a very long conversation with our own community about what is the role of the outreach committee, what is the role of the diversity, equity and inclusion and women in AppSec. Should we be doing something different? I believe that we need to be at Java 1. I believe that we need to be at the Microsoft.NET conferences. I believe that we need to be at every single conference of major importance for things like linux.conf.au and other areas where application developers are present. We need to be speaking, not just attending. We need to be speaking and having a huge impact on the hallway track. Just talking amongst ourselves, we're already converted. We know this stuff is important. We need to be chatting with our developers, and we need to be chatting with our executive leadership team and saying, what about this OWASP project? Can we help fund that? We really want this to be changed, but if we could provide a grant, it will get done quicker. And that's exactly what Google is doing at the moment with the ASVS. They're on the verge of adopting the ASVS as their internal coding standard. And that will actually improve the ASVS for everybody. So this is an amazing improvement in where we're going. But to do so, we need to actually say, okay, we're InfoSec professionals, we're application security professionals. We need to be good developers ourselves. Let's learn from our developer friends, but also help our developer friends understand AppSec better so that we're getting outside our own bubble. So a talk without solutions is just hand waving, and so I do actually have some solutions. And what we actually need is a meaning to OWASP that's not just, okay, I'm a member, I now get access to like a whole bunch of member resources. We're actually in the talks at the moment with Shodan, and they're willing to offer every OWASP member a free license to Shodan. This is an amazing thing. But if you're only joining OWASP because of the benefits, I think we've missed our opportunity. We need to have meaning. And that's one of the things that I think, honestly, we need to get back to. What is it to be a non-profit? It isn't entitlement to get free stuff. It is, how do I change the world? We need meaning. We need a new narrative, and the community needs to lead that narrative. I can help by shaping the narrative. I can help by getting my staff to stop working on tickets and helping reach out to projects. If you're a project leader, you probably have never heard from our project technology director. We need to change that. OWASP itself needs to change, but the community needs to come along for the ride as well. For scale, we must create framework relationships with frameworks. This is the way. We need to basically review their architecture against good practice, such as the ASVS, and provide not only a dialogue with them, but also, here is a pull request that actually implements these things. And therefore, everybody who uses that version of that framework from then on, not only is it, they just use a framework, they don't have to change. It's low friction, and it improves the security for absolutely everyone. We need to have e-learning available and in different languages, and that's where I think the SKF project comes into it. We need people to help write more of the articles in SKF and then share them so that we can have something like the ASVS, the longer version, so we can actually explain what we mean by please make sure that users can change their password. It's really quite important that we actually explain ourselves and the rationale behind some of these decisions. We need to have clinics where people can turn up. If you think about the Stack Overflow model, where thousands and millions of developers ask questions of each other, and then all of a sudden that code gets copy and pasted into hundreds of programs because it's the best answer. We as OWASP need to start going to these developer watering holes and answering better questions, better answers to the questions developers are frequently asking. But then go back to the frameworks and say, hey, you know what? Why don't we make this a little bit simpler, a little bit easier, and work with them to actually do stuff? Recently, we've been working with the Log4j project, and one of the things that we worked out is that not only is it difficult for them to work with us, and we need to change, we have some difficulties working with them. For example, only Apache members, and you need to be invited to be an Apache member, can see security vulnerabilities before they're released to the public. And I don't think we'll be invited to become a member of the Apache Foundation, because who do we invite? And this is the problem. So we need a liaison. We need a mechanism that allows people to drop in and say, hey, what's the status of this particular code review? How do we do it? Where's the pull request? What are we doing to actually fix these issues? We need to be easier, but also we're just talking about one particular project there, Log4j. What happens when we go down the pathway like I did last week? I needed to contact the maintainers of the Ada package manager and the Ada toolchain because they need to be at a certain conference in June. It took me nearly a week to find them. And then once we found each other, I got COVID and I was off the grid. We have a lot of really fragile relationships like this, but we need to build them up. Turns out that the Ada folks are tremendous. They already produce an SBOM by default. I don't know if you knew that, but that's actually tremendous. I didn't even know that, and Ada is one of my favorite languages. So one of the things I would suggest is that we need to be open to learning. We as OWASP need to be able to enable frameworks to approach us and talk to our community, but also we need a meta project, if you like, that allows us to have 3 or 4 working groups in different languages who might have 6 or 7 members to work through frameworks and be familiar with those frameworks and be familiar with the language they're implemented in. There's no point in getting someone who's a .NET specialist working on Node.js unless they're a full stack engineer. And if they're a full stack engineer, that's tremendous, but they're probably not working as a full-time AppSec professional. But what I'm trying to get across here is that we absolutely do need to have specialists in a particular skill set rather than just generic folks who are well-intentioned but don't know much about the language. There might be idioms that you're trying to fix that you're going to break hundreds of applications, if not millions of applications, because of the solution you've come up with. We need to come up with education for frameworks. We know the most common frameworks through the Stack Overflow developer surveys, we should be developing at least the top, like our education programs around those top 5 projects. I believe SKF is one of the best ways of delivering that, and making sure that videos are on YouTube that are easily found through SEO. So if you're on YouTube and you're typing in Securing Express, that our videos come up very close to the top, if not the top, and they're relevant and up to date. This is a major change, and we need to invest in that. That's something that may not necessarily get built unless there's an investment in it. And to do that, we need better fundraising. We need to cover and really work on architecture. I have been meaning to rewrite the architecture section of the ASVS for a long time. If you're also an enterprise architect or a software architect, please do come by the ASVS project. We need better architecture advice. What makes something secure? The best code is the code that's never written. For example, if you're implementing a forgot password mechanism and you're implementing the shameful, disgusting, awful questions and answers, you're wasting 10,000 lines of code and you're creating a really huge security bug. Architecture solves those problems by doing things better, in a better way, usually in a shorter way. For example, today I wanted to log into Eventbrite, but my various protections that I have built into my browser were stopping the Google single auth. So I sent myself a magic link. That is not only way more secure than passwords like the questions and answers, it's also like 10 lines of code. So we need to be better at security architecture, and we need to provide clear, evidence-based results to the architecture community. There's been a long time since we've had a book like SABSA turn up on security architecture that everyone sort of agrees, yes, that's good. And I think the ASVS is a way of doing that. We also need to do e-learning properly, and I think this is one of the areas that OpenSSF is leading the pack. We also need to do it. We have lots of trainers who are world famous because of the work that they've done with OWASP, such as the Jim Manicos, the Tanya Jankers, the Philip de Ricks. They've done a lot of stuff with OWASP over the years. We really do need, and to at Jim's credit, he's actually giving us 4 free training opportunities a year that is a fundraiser for the OWASP Foundation. And so Jim, hats off to him. He's doing exactly what we'd like to do. Tanya was, before a company was acquired, was providing free introduction AppSec materials that were e-learning. We need to get more into that ourselves, and realistically we need to be doing it at scale, and we need to do it in everyone's time zone. People in, say for example, Lagos or Phnom Penh, they need to be able to access materials they can understand, and that's the power of open source, and we need to do it and stop just discussing it. We need to get it built. Lastly, we're starting to get towards the end of these slides, and I do want to make sure there's time for questions. We need to get into mentoring. Tanya runs a Mentoring Monday program, so if you're not subscribed to Tanya's Twitter, please go and do so. It's She Hacks Purple on Twitter. Mentoring is really, really critical, and I believe just as much as we might mentor developers, we should be mentoring the next generation of AppSec professionals, but also there's a place for developers to mentor us. All of us could stand to be better coders. I actually do projects in my spare time so that I can actually, let me just get the chat up, I can't see the chat. Yep, no problems. Sorry, I'm just getting notifications and I didn't see the chat. It's there, I'll look at it in a bit. We should all be doing projects, either OWASP projects or alternatively projects that scratch our own itch. I'm currently working on one at the moment that helps my game. The game itself is extremely heavily tool driven. If you're going to be doing a lot of stuff in the game, you'll probably want to use the tools. So I'm actually helping code one of these tools that actually detects when a particular set of events occur. And interestingly enough, let me just show you the book. For those of you who have a computer science bent, you're probably familiar with the Corman book. I actually had to buy the 4th edition. So the 4th edition actually discusses clustering. Clustering is the way that we detect changes over time. And yes, Chitra, you will be getting those slides. So I bought the book, I just read it, and quite frankly, you can't read the entire book. You read it as a chapter. It was incredible. I learned a lot just by picking up this computer science textbook, but it also helped me improve my coding skills. And it made me understand how this particular program did its thing, its magic. It uses an algorithm called DB scan, and it's not database scanning, it's literally clustering. So data clusters together, and when it gets to a certain threshold, we consider the tick has occurred. And it was essentially magic to the person who actually even coded it. So getting that book and learning about clustering, and I'm not talking like clusters of computers like Raspberry Pis or anything, I'm talking about data being clustered, really helped me. And that's where I think we need to actually improve. So mentoring is incredibly important. Also peer review. I mean peer review. We are not better than our developer friends. We are not worse than our developer friends. We are peers, and we should treat them as such. I don't like this us versus them type of dichotomy. If we're sitting to the side, we're not part of the project. We need to be embedded with the project. And again, the market isn't built like that. The market is built as a short, sharp consulting gig that lasts 3 to 5 days, and then you're out. Whereas the security architect is there for months, and they're budgeted in. There should be a security person budgeted in. And at the moment, that's not the way it works in many organizations. When you do code reviews, I would strongly recommend that you actually do pull requests. Give them your potential solution. They can peer review your code and decide whether it's going to get merged or not. And you know what? That is so empowering to you, because you know that some of your code will actually be in production and helping people. Don't produce PDFs. PDFs are so 1990. Please don't do that anymore. Stop. Pull requests. And most of all, talk. You can learn so much just by going backwards and forwards with folks. Don't just assume that you know everything there is to know about AppSec. I don't know everything to know about AppSec. And, I literally, at one point wrote the book on it. That doesn't mean that I know everything, and I don't. Please, let's be humble. Let's have a dialogue and improve security together. Come on, next slide. You can do it, yay! One of the things I think is critical is getting C-level buy-in. If a CTO or a CISO or the head of AppSec buys into securing apps from the very word go, not only will it cost them less in the long run, it should produce a low friction environment. And to my mind, low friction means frameworks that are automatically secure. And this also means, like for example, the reason why we've seen such a decrease in cross-site scripting is because of the rise of frameworks like React and AngularJS that are essentially cross-site scripting safer. You can still shoot yourself in the foot, but it's harder. And if you're doing peer reviews properly, even at a developer level, and you're manipulating the DOM by yourself, you're probably going to get a smackdown from the tech lead. So if you use React and Angular exactly the way it was supposed to be used, you're going to be cross-site scripting free. And because the framework is secure, you're secure. That's the low friction way. And therefore, the easy secure way is the way to go forward. And instead of saying no, you can't go live, let's say yes, if here's a pull request. That's where we need to go. So where we need to go is we need to get our projects to be, there is a map that was produced by the integration project, which is a meta project of sorts. We need to produce project ideas and funding ideas that cross lab, incubator, and flagship, that cross the bridge between community and projects. We don't really cope well with that today. We actually have like the project spotlight, which is both a community thing, and it's a project, and yet it's hard. Project Spotlight is one of those things that is not quite a project and not quite a community activity. If you are interested in getting involved in the Project Spotlight, please do email Vandana Verma. She's our chair, but she also does the spotlights. Okay, so I think I've already covered this in one of the previous slides, and it is so fundamental I've said it twice. This is the brain fog I was talking about, so I do apologize for the repetition. I will be providing the slides. This slide will survive, but please learn something new every day. I literally, just before this actually came, before the actual talk, I was able to get books delivered from Amazon on how to present data in a more visual way. We are going to be doing a lot of fundraising, and the fundraising is going to require us to present a lot of information in an information-dense way that is accurate and easily understood by many different people. So I am trying to learn something new because I need to get into fundraising, which is an area that I've never really been involved with before. This is something that we're going to be doing a lot of. You're going to hear a lot about grants, you're going to hear a lot about fundraising, and you're going to hear a lot about projects getting the grants to do more work. So learn something new every day. Work with your executives, work with your developers. Be their peers, not their bosses. You're not their boss, okay? We are not auditors. Unless you're a CPA and you actually have started auditing, you're not an auditor. So don't think of yourselves as an auditor. You're not, okay? So the strategic supply chain model, we need to get down and do some research. We need to build out security in the top-end frameworks, and to do that we need to actually learn what those frameworks are about and what security they already provide and what gaps they have, and work with them. You can't just roll up to them and say, hey, you know what, you're missing this. Work with them. They might have an authentication module that you weren't aware of, and then you can save yourself hundreds of hours of development, and yet you didn't know anything about this thing, and all of a sudden you're going to have to redo your work, or more to the point, your work may never get used, which is what happened to ES-API. So having our own stuff to the side, like ES-API, is the wrong thing. We need finance. We need to be able to do grants, and to do that we need to do crowdfunding and fundraising. We would like you, if you didn't already know, membership is a donation to OWASP, and therefore if your employer has donation matching, grab an invoice and you can actually get a donation match from your employer. So if you're thinking about becoming a lifetime member, that is a really good way of doing it. You can actually get a tax benefit in many cases in the United States by becoming a member. We need to make sure that people understand that our fundraising is there, and there's lots of opportunities to do it. We will be doing some excellent work during Giving November. We will be making sure that we are there and advertising our fundraising, and to do that we need to have packages of grants ready to go, and those grants should be something strategic that we're going to invest in the long term. And so the board, for the first time, now has the tools to be able to say, we want to direct $60,000 towards this to get this built. And they hadn't ever had that before. That's why the finance reform went through. We needed to just simply be able to balance out our mission. Our mission has 3 parts. We were only ever doing one part really, which was chapters in the past, and events were funding everything. I want to make sure that every single part of OWASP is self-funding, including projects. I would like to have more staff, not less, but I don't want to be the world's biggest organization. I think probably 8 to 9 people is enough, but to do that we need to be able to think strategically about how we scale. And at the moment we would not be able to scale. Harold is already very, very busy, but he doesn't actually deal with projects on a regular basis, and we need to change that. So this is the last slide. I will get to some questions. Basically, we need to get to tangible security with kindness and pull requests. We need to be at the table. One of the problems that we now that we've got a natural competitor in the form of the OpenSSF, they are friends, but they're also doing what they're doing. And because they've got funding, they have like $11 million this year they're going to spend. That's a significant multiplier of the amount of money that we actually have, full stop. So we need to do more fundraising. We also need to change our meaning. We need to have a secure supply chain, and we need to start thinking about the ways that we can help the industry grow in a way that's scalable. We must design in security, and it must be low friction. If we do things that provide high levels of friction, the computer says no, we will fail. If it's one-to-one, we will fail. We must do it at scale, and I believe that means we work with frameworks. Okay? So we must have some meaning, and we need the community to help us work out what that meaning is. And with that, thank you so much. Okay.
Thank you very much, Andrew. That was illuminating. It's great to hear from our leader what the vision is and which direction we're headed. I see there have been a number of questions, and let's see. One was, you mentioned a book that several people wanted the title of. Maybe that would be a quick one. Not the one you held up about data visualization. It came before that.
The Coleman book, Algorithms.
Yes.
Introduction to Algorithms. This is not a cheap book. Turns out textbooks are expensive. It's the standard computer science textbook for algorithms. If it's not in this book, it doesn't exist.
Also, earlier on, you mentioned some free training links, and people are some free training, and people were interested in whether the links to those could be made available.
Absolutely. I will, once I actually deliver the slides to you, I'll provide links to not only the member benefits, but also some of those other things.
Great. Maybe you can see them there in the Q&A button down at the bottom. There are a couple of questions. One from Jet, one from David Klassen.
Okay.
I can read them to you if that's easier.
No, I've got it on screen.
Okay.
Absolutely. So the question is, all devs should graduate with AppSec knowledge. Any thoughts on how we can influence higher ed and code schools to make that a dream a reality? Honestly, it's working with academics. We've already identified that academics have a not invented here policy. They want to develop their own curriculum, so what we need to do is provide them a syllabus framework, which then they can build out. We can provide a reference one, so that essentially people who are not in a position to spend their entire summer or have grad students work on a syllabus, we absolutely do need academics to be involved, and we do have the education committee for that exact reason. If you want to get involved in the education committee, they meet once a month, and we definitely need help. We've got a grant from Google that is waiting to be, sorry, not Google, Accenture, that is waiting to get going. I would certainly encourage you to get involved. And so David's question, sometimes in security, review code is never written because the security problems have not been well thought through yet, and we know it. Yep. So threat modeling. So honestly, we need to come up with a threat model and identify where gaps might exist, and then that can be used to say, okay, this code doesn't yet exist, but this is the threat model, therefore I would encourage you to write tests that fail until they actually exist. So I would get into the habit of writing tests. So instead of saying this is all bad, create yourself a threat model and then write tests that would actually satisfy that threat model, and then developers can help fill in the blanks. So it is the hamster wheel of pain. I can absolutely no, the standoffish approach I don't believe is the best approach. We should be working in a DevOps way, an agile way, but we actually work in a stage gate environment. I don't believe that's the right way. It hasn't been the right way for years and years and years and years. We need to catch up, and we need a better way of working with DevOps teams and people who are using agile mechanisms. Okay, there is a lot of typing in the chat. Brian, could I ask you to forward the chat to me when you download the recording of this, and I'll see what I can do about getting some answers to folks if I can.
I would be happy to do that.
Okay, no worries. Well, in the absence of any other questions, I think I'm right on time.
I think you are too. That was terrific. Thank you.
No
Well, we'll
worries.
have a short pause here then before the next presentation begins. We'll start again on the hour.